and we'll hold you accountable.
Is it African time or? My presentation, which is part of the paper that I submitted for this conference, is in a way a follow-up from what Bill Easterly has been talking about this morning. This puzzle that is going on in the international development circuits. It seems like the more you become authoritarian, the more money you get from the international community. So there is some strange thing going on. Development economists have been trying to explain what actually is going on. So what I did in the paper was trying to explain why is that happening and what is the claim. What is the justification for that, and whether that justification merits some kind of legitimacy on the basis of the facts on the ground. So this is really where the paper is going. So, but to start you off, and I think he said it earlier, it's better to give you the conclusion of the paper first, so that if Bafkaru on purpose stops me, at least you know what the message is. Here is what I want to say. The central message of the paper is that stability, political stability and durable development in Ethiopia is not going to be possible without establishing a democratically accountable state. There is no option, in my view, at least in the long term. And this is because of two reasons. One, the theoretical reason or the theoretical argument linking democratization to development. There is quite a big debate that's taking place. And two, because of the specific situation in Ethiopia, the specific circumstances in Ethiopia require that stability can only be achieved through real, meaningful democratic accountability. So, on the basis of this, what the paper wants to argue is the claim that there is another way to long-term development and stability through authoritarian governance that the government is trying to push is not supported by the facts on the ground. This is really what I want to show. So the paper first looks at the debate, broadly, the debate on the relationship between good governance, stability, and economic development. And it's a very sizable debate, and this debate has been taking place for quite a long time. One of the most common known stories, of course, is modernization theory, as you know, which essentially says that democratization comes after economic development takes place. So democracy is something that comes after economic development. Therefore, if you really want democratization, then first you have to find a way to develop first. So it justifies authoritarian developmental states are the ones that will push you to the next stage of democratization. Sometimes it's called the Lee thesis, on the basis of Singapore's Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, who essentially argues that developing countries cannot afford democracy because what they need is development, and for development to take place, you need a strong state, powerful, strong state. Of course, on the other side, there has been quite a lot of papers proving, on the basis of cross-sectional studies, that is actually not the case, that historically democracies has performed much better in terms of economic development than authoritarian governments, that for every Lee Kuan Yew, you have hundreds of kleptocrats, such as Mobutu Sese Seko and the rest of them. So the argument that there is one or a few East Asian examples doesn't necessarily mean that that will happen to other parts of the world, specifically in Africa. So after I evaluated that debate, then the next question for me was to really talk about what do we mean by democratic accountability, and that discussion also has taken place in the morning. In fact, when talking about democratic accountability, essentially have three elements: the vertical accountability, horizontal accountability, and what more recently is added is the idea of societal accountability out of elections, where the media and civic society, scientists of that sort, held governments accountable in between elections, and that very important part of the democratic process. So I go through that, and you will find that discussion in the paper. Then coming to Ethiopia, the first thing that I wanted to do is to look at the history of the country, and at least modern Ethiopian history is nothing but a history of authoritarianism. They come in different names, starting from the emperor to the military socialist dictatorship of Mengistu, to the more ethnic-based dictatorship of the current government. All of them are invariably authoritarian. The underlying presumption of all these regimes is that the public is either too childish, or too backward, or too reactionary to know what is good for itself. We, the enlightened dictators, are the ones that know what is good for the public. The underlying, whichever way you cut it, the underlying presumption is that people don't know what is good for them. They are just like children. And it is, people were talking about the colonial experience, and that's exactly what the colonial countries have been saying about us, that we are not in any way capable of administering ourselves. What we have now is local dictators who are telling us exactly the same thing. So in terms of Ethiopia, this is a common theme. The second important thing to realize about all of them is that all of them justify their existence in power in the name of developmentalism. All of them are claiming that we are good because we are the ones that could develop. The emperor has been talking about how it is important to civilize in order to protect ourselves from foreign invasion. Mengistu has been talking about how it is important to develop through socialism, the only way that Ethiopia can go forward and claim its place in Africa. Meles is now the developmentalist state who is there to take the country into this double-digit growth. All of them, the logic is the same. We are the ones who would achieve rapid economic development. Now, the question of democratic accountability for the first time in Ethiopian history came in 2005. In 2005 it came because the government was more or less comfortable that it would win the election, because it thought it would win the election. It wanted to test the waters. And that experiment ended right there in 2005. The issue of democratic accountability is no more discussed. In fact, if you, while the tapes around 2005, Meles would be the first person to tell you that Ethiopia's survival as a nation requires that we are democratic. Therefore, democracy is something that we need to survive. No foreigner should tell us about democratization, because we know we need it. After 2005, that discussion has stopped, of course. But the discussion has now changed into this discussion that says, we are the developmentalist state. We will develop the country much faster than any. Therefore, don't talk about democracy and democratization, because we will deliver the goods, the economic goods. So, what is the basis for legitimacy for the Ethiopian government? 4 items. And this is, by the way, implicitly shared by the international community to a certain extent. 1, we deliver accountable, clean, and efficient government. 2, we are committed to development. Others are committed for something else, but we are the ones who are really committed to development. And this we can show by the rapid economic growth that we have delivered since, the time is very important, since 2005. And finally, economic performance is more important for stability in the long run than democratic accountability. Therefore, accept us as the legitimate rulers because of that. And what I did was to take that seriously and look at the data on economic performance and to see really whether there is some truth to this claim. Now, before I go there, 2 things. 1, the 2 questions that we need to answer is, 1, is the claim true? Is it actually true? Is that what the government has delivered? The second question is, even if it is true, why does one presume that the same or even better cannot be delivered through democratic government? And the fact that an authoritarian government can deliver a 10% growth doesn't automatically mean that a democratic government cannot deliver that. Therefore, you cannot justify lack of democracy on the basis of rapid growth. So keep those two issues in mind. The time that I want to spend more, because it's very interesting, is to look at the claim itself, the data itself. And here is what the problem is with the data. The first issue always, whenever you talk about data on Africa in general, and in the Ethiopian case it is so deliberate, you'll see what I mean a little bit later, is the degree to which you can rely on the data. How reliable is actually the data that is officially spewed out? So what I did was to look at what the government is saying and see if indeed that matches with the numbers that we know from other sources. The government's claim has three interrelated things, at least on the basis of fact, what we know. One, that there has been a very high level of growth, economic growth, roughly about 10–11% per year since about 2005, and that this growth was accounted by a very rapid growth in the cereal production sector of agriculture, which is roughly about 12% per year over 5 or 6 years. So agriculture has been growing very fast. Folks, I mean, 12% growth in agriculture is really a big amount of growth. So that's what the government is doing. At the same time, there are two other things that are known. One, agricultural products prices has sharply increased during the same time. The lowest figures that we have is about 75%. The highest is up to 178%. Output is increasing like mad. Prices are at the same time increasing like crazy. Three, the same time around 2006, 2008, the number of people seeking food aid from the international community has increased from about 6 million to about 13 million. Now, you look at these numbers and you say, wait a second, right? I mean, if you are following voodoo economics, that might be true, but insofar as the normal economics profession, there is something wrong with these numbers, right? So what happened was, people started to say, let's look at these numbers more closely. Since agriculture is the most important part of this claim, then, a bunch of academics went and started to look at the agricultural output figures more closely. Stephen Durkin and a bunch of them started to do this study, and what they found was interesting. This 12% growth per year over 5 years, or 6–7 years actually, was taking place while there was no increase whatsoever on the input side. There was no increase in fertilizer use. There was no increase in irrigation. There was no increase in improved inputs. So where is this growth coming from? What is the source of this growth? Well, just God is all powerful and can do that. But, in this specific case, where did it come from? So they said, there is something strange. And I'll tell you what their conclusions are later. They said, there is something wrong with these numbers. And of course, since the overall growth numbers are accounted by the agricultural growth, which is a bigger portion of the economy, if the agricultural numbers are not true, then the whole growth story is not true. Two, you look at the data inconsistency just from the government itself. It is quite fascinating. Now, for example, if you look at land under cereal production, the Ministry of Agriculture number, the number that you get from the Ministry of Agriculture of Ethiopia, is higher to that collected by the Central Statistics Authority by 19.5% in 2006–2007. I mean, what the government, the Ministry of Agriculture gives you is 19.5% higher than what the CSA is giving you. In 2005–2006, it was higher by 45%. I mean, it is as if they are talking about two different countries. I mean, it cannot be the same country that they are talking. So these numbers cannot be trusted. So what do you do? So you look at if there are any independent surveys around to see if the independent survey figures are consistent with what the government is claiming. And there was. It so happened in 2006 and 2008, there were two surveys. And a study by Gilligan and others found out that, in fact, if you look at the data in 2006, 2008, they did a study on the basis of this survey for 103 woredas. They found the following, that between 2006 and 2008, yield, meaning output per hectare, declined by 14%, 14.4% for maize, 13.75% for wheat, 18.4% for barley, and almost 25% for teff. Output, notice the government is claiming that this increase in agricultural output is caused by two things. One, an increase in size, area of cultivated land, by 44%. God only knows where this land came from. But the second one is productivity, yield increases. But in these surveys, actually output has declined during this same period. So what the government is giving and what independent surveys are showing are absolutely entirely different. Now, this data problem is not related to only agriculture. In fact, the social data, as you know, recently the Ethiopian government was praised for achieving the Millennium Development Goals in 3 or 4 of the 8 goals that the United Nations talked about. And in one of them, the child vaccination. The data that the Ministry of Health provides is high by 60% compared to independent surveys of vaccination. So the official data says it has increased by 60%, while the independent surveys show that there is no such number at all. Now, some people generally presume that, look, if these data are that what? Of course, the international community will not accept it, so the World Bank and the IMF would have some different numbers. In fact, one of the interesting things, if you ask the Ethiopian government, they will tell you that our data is so correct that the IMF and the World Bank has proved that that data is correct. How do you know that? Because they put it in their World Development Indicator numbers, which the international community uses. Now, one thing that every economist knows is that the World Bank and the IMF do not have any macro data that they get by themselves. They get it from the government. So, here is the nature of the game. The government comes up with a bad number, a false number, gives it to the international community, they put it in their number, then the government comes back and says, you see, the international community has proved that our numbers are correct. I mean, literally, that is the nature of the game that is being played. And sometimes you need to be very careful about the data that you see, even in the international numbers. One researcher recently found some interesting data. If you look at World Development Indicators, for the same variable, between 1990 and 2000, one of the variables that they looked at was the availability of clean water. And what this researcher did was, it looked at the same number across 4 or 5 reports of World Development Indicators. It started with 2003. So the data is for 10 years between 1990 and 2000. The 2003 data essentially says clean water supply has decreased by 4%. After that, the reports start to progressively get better. And by the time you look at the 2009 report, clean water supply during the same period, 1990 to 2000, has increased by 123%. You know? Why is this game being played? Because two interests are now coalescing in the international development industry. The international aid industry wants to give money. For the money that it gives, it wants to claim that there is some progress that's being done. The local governments want this money, Therefore, they give them this progress in numbers. And everybody is happy. The only one that's not happy, of course, is the people who live there, whose life actually has gotten significantly worse in a number of areas. You look at the data on poverty reduction, you'd get the same story. Recently, there was a report. By the way, the absurdity of this data, let me tell you just because it is so fun to look at this data. At one point, they were talking about enrollment at elementary level. So one of the states of one of the 9 states in Ethiopia, the Afar region, the regional state, reported, this is just this year, 2010, in August, that the number of children that are going to be enrolled in the Afar education system this year is 5 million kids. It is reported, and the Ethiopian news agency posted it in its website, and it was reported in Amharic. And by the way, it is not, it's not because they didn't write the zeros right, because it was in words, 5 million children. The most recent census for Afar says the total population of Afar is 1.4 million. That's how absurd it is. I mean, it has become such a game that, the government gives a number, the donor community gives money, and, the number of money that is being, where is the data? How do I get to this thing? I have these tables that I need to. Yeah. Yes. How much money are we talking about? Look at these numbers. The growth in foreign aid for Ethiopia has increased from about 1.8 million in 2004 to about 3.3 billion in 2009. An 84% increase. An 84% increase for Ethiopia, and this is happening after the massacre of hundreds of people in Ethiopia following the 2005 election. But is the government providing a clean, accountable government? Look at the data from the World Bank. And in fact, the argument always, when you talk to donor agencies, what they tell you is the Ethiopian government is the cleanest government in Africa, relatively clean. Therefore, by African standards, it is a clean government. If you look at the number, with the exception of government effectiveness, in every item that deals with governance, from voice and accountability, political stability, regulatory quality, rule of law, and corruption, Ethiopia is worse than the average in African countries. So if the measure of why this government has to be supported is because it provides a clean government, obviously it's not providing any clean government, even by African standards. We're not talking about by Swedish standards. We're talking about by African standards. Even by African standards, it is actually significantly worse. Not only that, the other interesting thing is, at least you hope, when all this money is going there is some improvement, right? I mean, look at, what I did was I looked at 3 years, 5 years interval, 2009, 2005, and 2000. In 4 of the 6 categories of governance, in 4 of them, things are getting worse rather than better. So how do you justify this provision of continuous aid? Now, let me give you the last data, to give you a sense of what kind of manipulation is taking place in the data. If you look at the data from 1991 to 2004, economic growth and agricultural growth, Ethiopia's growth is reasonably close to the average African standard. All of a sudden, between 2005 and 2009, it just went berserk, So the rest of Africa is growing around 5%, all of a sudden Ethiopia is about 11%. Agricultural output, look, the rest of Africa is on average about 4%, Ethiopia is already about 9.5%, right? So the question is, what happened? All of a sudden, did we find gold, oil, or nothing? Is there a change in policy? Nothing. It is the same government, it is the same policy, All of a sudden, this thing is changing. Why? Because the way to justify to stay in power for the international community is to say we are delivering growth. And the only thing that the international community requires of you is to simply give them the numbers. And they will take it and they say, since they want to give money in the first place, you know, but what is the effect of this? Now, well, let me say two more things. Playing with this data is really interesting because it says a lot of things about what's going on. Sometimes even when the numbers are right, sometimes when, for example, the issue of enrollment, the government says that it has increased significantly the enrollment of children. In fact, in 3 areas, at elementary, secondary, and technical school level, according to official government data, enrollment increased 7 times for elementary education, 2 times, 200% increase in secondary education, and 2,300% in technical education in 5 years, in 10 years, between 1994-95 and 2005-2006. Now, let's assume these numbers are right. But notice what's going on. When a country like Ethiopia increases the numbers like this, like crazy, what are the resources that a good education requires? Right? You need to have teachers, not only just buildings, right? I mean, you need to have teachers, you need to have educational materials and things of that sort to show that you are growing in a way that the quality of education is keeping up with this increase. But one of the most fascinating things and the most really depressing things that's going on in Ethiopia is with the numbers of this increase, especially in education, the quality of education in Ethiopia has gone absolutely dead, literally. And here is some of the measures of quality of education, as you know, is to look at standardized test scores. Let me give you numbers about standardized test scores. 2000, 2004, 2007, 3 years data. The average grade for the students, the passing grade was 50%, the average grade in this for all students was 41%. It declined from 41% in 2000 to 39.7%, and by the time you reach 2008, it has gone down to 35.6%. Let me give you another number. The percentage of students getting a grade less than 25%. Now, we're all educators, so we know what 25% means. I mean, if you just guess, anyone can guess and get roughly about 25%. You don't have to even go to school to get that. The number of students who got 25% in physics increased below 25% from 96% of the students to 99%. In math, it increased from 86% to 90.1%. In English language, from 39.6% to 66.8%. Now, I don't care how many numbers you put in this. What kind of education is that if the average grade for the students, the average grade, by the way, for these 3 subjects, physics, math, and English, is about 14%. So really, I mean, and therefore, give us some more money, right? That is the nature of the game that is taking place in Ethiopia. If it was not the disaster that it would bring in the long run on Ethiopian society, it would have been funny. But there is nothing funny about it because a whole generation of children are completely uneducated by any major, I don't see it. All right. So, in short, the argument that you can provide long-term stability and long-term development through ethnic-based dictatorship over the long run does not make sense whatsoever. The only way for Ethiopia to be stable, the only way for Ethiopia to provide long-term, durable, stable governance, development is by constituting a democratically accountable government. That's why I call my paper, there is no shortcut to stability and development. The only road is to establish a real, meaningful, accountable regime. That is the only way that we can achieve any kind of development in Ethiopia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary.